Many of us, we want to fly the flag of St George with great pride. It is the symbol of England. But, of course, many people feel they can't do that. Nike is having a playful update on that. I mean, it's sacrilegious, isn't it?
I mean, definitely. I have to admit, I'm not a football fan. And when I first heard this story, I was a bit like, really? Is this really important? But I think that totally just dismisses the fact that for lots of people, flying the flag of Britain is a really important thing.
Of
it's
England.
Patriotism of England, of Britain.
I'm just
That's
correcting you.
It's true. That just shows how little I know about football.
Well, it's not just football, that's the point.
It is, and I think, especially when it comes to sports, I think a lot of people feel really, really strongly about representing our country, and they think that this just totally disguises what we are standing for. I mean, when I saw the new flag, I didn't even know that it was meant to be a flag. It doesn't look anything like the current flag of England. So I do get where people's frustration lies. I think in that whole interview, Keir Starmer was very much just trying to seem very kind of normal, very human, very relatable, and I think that was definitely part of it too.
Yeah, it's interesting because this was on a new programme last night. He was sitting in your seat,
right here.
Alicia, and wide-ranging interview with Sir Keir Starmer. Talking about the kit, but also talking about trust. Questions from Sun readers, and the majority of those questions were all about how can we trust you? You've changed your position so many times on Jeremy Corbyn, on Brexit, for example, on the 28 million. How was Sir Keir Starmer? How did he come across? How did he answer that to his critics?
I think this whole interview he was really, really trying to just assert himself as a kind of man of the people. He was trying to come across a bit more relaxed than he maybe has done in other broadcast interviews. It was a bit more of an informal conversation. Lots of the questions asked were a bit more, bit less kind of political and more just trying to dig a bit deeper into
who is this man?
As a person. And I think as a whole, he came across pretty well. I think lots of people were quite happy with his responses, and lots of people felt that he actually did quite well in just seeming quite relaxed. I think sometimes he gets a lot of criticism for turning up to interviews and being a bit rigid and having very kind of prepared answers, and I think yesterday he did an OK job in trying to quell those arguments.
Let's bring Paul in now. Paul, he did an OK job, Alicia said. Just in terms of that, I think many people are sitting there saying, what does the Labour Party stand for? Who is Keir Starmer? I think Alicia's point is really valid, actually. Many people haven't seen the real him. Is this more of the real him? Will we see more of this, the more relaxed man of the people?
I think he is growing into the role, you know. I mean, he hasn't been leader all that long, and much of that time was taken up with COVID. So people don't really know him. And also, people don't really think about politics that much, don't forget. You know, most people are not wondering what the leader of the Labour Party is up to today. And now we get into a general election year, they will start to switch on. So he is introducing himself still. And the stuff around the St George's flag, I think, is a perfect example of this. You know, he is a proper football fan. He does care about these things. And the fact that he gave the interview to The Sun at all is interesting, because some Labour figures in the past would refuse to talk to The Sun. So the fact he's reaching out to Sun readers, who he knows full well might well be thinking about voting Labour at the next election for the first time, is a sort of a positive sign, I think, that he is reaching out. He doesn't have to try. I mean, he is a bloke. He does like his football and his beer. You know, he is that sort of a chap, and that's what the public is slowly and surely starting to see.
He was happy to talk about the England flag and the England kit, Paul, but there were other questions he was a bit less willing to answer, whether he'd ever taken drugs, for example, but on policy issues as well, talking about the pensions triple lock, very much refusing to commit on anything on that. Is that going to be a problem for him when we go to the polls?
Well, the bigger problem will be that if Labour goes into the polls with a massive sort of spending commitment, which the Conservatives can then wrap up as being a huge tax rise, that's what Labour's fear is, that there'll be a sort of tax bombshell campaign from the Conservatives and put people off. So they're being ever so cautious about spending commitments, and they're getting criticised for it. But the calculus is that it's better to be criticised for being cautious than it is to be criticised for taking everyone's tax. So that's why you're starting to see these. And you mentioned the 28 billion in green investment. You know, they are a lot of flack for that, but it's probably better to get that row out of the way now than have it hanging around your head in an election. And on the flag, of course, he's just instinctively on the side of everyone who is waking up this morning utterly outraged at what Nike have done to the England strip and to the flag. It's an absolute nonsense. And they need to, by lunchtime, they need to tell us that they're not going to do this, because it's an affront and it's an insult and it's entirely unnecessary.
Alyssa, let's move now to the migrant crisis, because Rishi Sunak has made it one of his 5 key pledges to judge him on for the general election. Stop the boats, remember. Yesterday, 500 people came into this country. We're now at 4,000. These numbers are off the scale. Meanwhile, we're now in this absurd position of the Safety of Rwanda bill being in the ping-pong stage. I think most people watching this are wondering what on earth is our parliamentary democracy is based on. So essentially going from the Commons to the Lords, back to the Commons again, another 7 amendments.
Yes, and the trouble is the Conservatives keep coming forward and saying they have a plan, but the trouble is the plan, whatever it is, isn't working, clearly. I mean, this is a huge amount of illegal migrants to actually make it across the channel here to the UK, and it just adds to an already really, really high number. So this is something that Rishi Sunak pretty much pinned his whole leadership on. It's stopping illegal migration, and it's something that is just totally not going well for him in any regard. And as you said, David, we've now got this ping-pong stage between the 2 houses. Just to simplify that is where the House of Commons make a piece of legislation. It then goes to be assessed and scrutinised by the House of Lords. They try and make some changes. It goes back and then back and forth until they eventually compromise. And at the moment, it's going to be looking like quite some time until that happens.
Paul, the Conservative Party say that it's all Labour's fault. It's Labour peers. They say they're trying to break the smuggling gangs. They're trying to prevent people crossing the channel, but they're being obstructed by Labour.
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But it's the failure of the policy. The policy itself is utterly failing. And to pin your entire strategy on getting flights off to Rwanda, which will only affect a tiny, tiny number of the people arriving, is a nonsense. I mean, historians will look back at this with absolute unbelievable. They won't believe that the whole of the government strategy was based on getting a flight off from Heathrow to Rwanda.
What is Keir Starmer's policy? What would he do? We spent 500 million on France. That hasn't exactly worked out. We signed the Frontex deal. That hasn't worked out. What would Starmer do?
Well, Starmer and Yvette Cooper have talked about stopping the boats, but you stop them before they get to the French coast. You disrupt the business model by smashing the gangs, and you invest in policing and security forces doing that in conjunction with the Belgians and the French in order to stop the gangs from getting anywhere near the beaches of Europe before they get anywhere near the UK. And to talk about, stopping people once they're on the water is nonsense. And that's obviously failing because of the numbers that we're seeing arriving. And the cost, I live in Eastbourne, and they've just closed the hotels here, and they've dispersed the asylum seekers that were living in the hotels. It's going to cost far more to shut those hotels and then send them off to other parts of the UK than the policy that we had. It's burning up money, it's not working, and most of all, it's not helping the poor souls who are arriving here, traumatised from war zones, who just want to make a better life.